Welcome to the podcast. I am Jimmy, your host. Tonight, we begin with something soft, something old, something that doesn't really want to wake you up at all. So dim the lights. Let the phone fall where it may, and if you drift off halfway through, honestly, that's the point. Tonight, we're going to a town that barely noticed it was changing. Because the most important changes never arrive with trumpets. They arrive quietly, like autumn, like regret, like a dream you only remember by feeling. This town did not think of itself as magical. Of course it didn't. Towns rarely do. It thought of itself as practical, brick buildings, narrow streets, a river that moved slowly, as if it had nowhere urgent to be, which, frankly, was accurate. People here woke up early, went to work, aged slightly every year, married the wrong people for the right reasons, and told themselves that was adulthood. Romance existed here, technically. It just arrived late, stayed briefly, and left without explaining itself. And then there was her, the woman they would eventually call the dream painter, though at first she was simply inconvenient. Her name was Elara, not dramatic, not prophetic, just unusual enough to feel slightly out of place. She lived at the edge of town, where the buildings stopped pretending they had a future. Her house leaned a little to the left. Because why not double down on symbolism? Elara painted for a living, which already made her suspicious. Painters are tolerated, not trusted. They observe too much. They notice things other people would rather keep blurry. She painted dreams. Not visions, not prophecies, dreams. The soft kind, the ones that fade by morning, the ones people forget but somehow miss all day. Her studio smelled like oil paint and old wood and autumn rain that never quite dried. Canvases leaned against every wall, most unfinished. Some turned to face the corner, like children being disciplined. She worked slowly, always slowly, because dreams, it turns out, are fragile things. Rush them and they sulk. At night, Elara slept poorly. Of course she did. People who handle dreams for a living rarely get good ones of their own. But sometimes she would wake with an image still clinging to her mind. A color, a shape, a feeling she could almost name, and she would paint it. At first, nothing happened, which is how these stories always begin. The first painting that worked was small, barely worth mentioning. A simple canvas, muted blues, a quiet hill under a fading sky, a single tree. Losing its leaves. Autumn again. It always comes back to autumn. She sold it to a baker, a man who woke too early and slept too late, a man who missed his wife in the quiet moments, but never said her name out loud. He hung it above his bed, because it felt right. That night, he dreamed of walking beneath that tree, leaves crunching, air cool, a feeling of peace that made no practical sense. In the morning, he woke rested, which annoyed him, because he hadn't earned it. The next painting went to a woman who collected clocks, all broken, all stopped at different times, because of course she did. She dreamed of time moving gently again, not racing, not standing still, just moving. After that, people began to talk, quietly, because talking loudly about strange things invites consequences. They said Elara's paintings felt different, that sleeping near them changed the texture of dreams, that mornings felt kinder. No one said magic. That word makes people uncomfortable. They said coincidence. They said placebo. They said probably nothing, which is the most dangerous phrase a town can say. Elara noticed the changes before anyone else did. Painters always do. Colors in the town grew warmer, shadows softened. People paused more often when walking, as if listening for something they couldn't quite hear. Romance, too, began to behave strangely. Not dramatically, nothing cinematic, just small things. Hands held a second longer. Letters written but never sent. Apologies considered. Love didn't arrive, but it lingered nearby, and Elara kept painting. Each canvas came from a dream she barely remembered, and each dream came from somewhere she couldn't identify. She never painted faces clearly, only impressions, profiles, figures turned away, because dreams don't like to be recognized. Soon, the mayor paid her a visit, which is never a good sign. He stood in her studio, uncomfortable among the canvases. A man built for paperwork, not wonder. He asked polite questions, smiled in the way people do when they want reassurance but don't deserve it. People are saying things, he said. Of course they were. Elara nodded. She always nodded. Listening was easier than arguing. Just paintings, she said, which was true, in the way truths often are. The mayor bought one, a small piece, neutral colors, nothing too risky. That night, he dreamed of being young again, not powerful, just young. He woke unsettled, because nostalgia is rarely polite. The town continued to change, slowly, quietly, beautifully, and no one noticed that the dreams were beginning to linger after waking, that people carried pieces of sleep into daylight, that memories softened, that regrets loosened their grip. The dream painter kept working, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, that she was no longer just painting dreams. She was rearranging reality, gently, like moving furniture in the dark. And somewhere, deep beneath the town, something old stirred, something that remembered when dreams and waking were never meant to be separate. But we won't rush there. Let's stay here a little longer, in the quiet, in the early change. When morning arrived in the town, and morning here always arrived slowly, as if it had to convince itself, the streets looked mostly the same. Cobblestones still slightly damp, windows still half forgotten to be opened. Autumn leaves doing what autumn leaves do best, which is exist quietly and look important. But something was different. No one could quite point to it at first. Of course they couldn't. Towns never notice change until it's already unpacked and made tea. Elara woke the same way she always did, late, with paint still under her fingernails, and with the vague feeling that she had done something meaningful while half asleep, which was becoming a bit of a pattern. She sat up on her narrow bed and stared at the wall across from her. The painting from the night before was dry now. The girl sleeping beneath the moon, the one with the soft, peaceful face, seemed calmer in daylight, less dramatic, less important. Just a dream, really. Elara tilted her head. "Still looks nice," she murmured, because artists always talk to their work, even when pretending they don't. She didn't notice, at first, that the air in the room felt warmer, not hot, just kinder. Downstairs, the town was waking. The baker's wife opened her shutters and paused. She stood there longer than usual, staring down the street with the expression of someone who had slept deeply for the first time in years and wasn't sure how to react. She touched her chest, just once, like she was checking something was still there. Across the square, the old clockmaker, who had not slept through the night since his brother disappeared into a war nobody talked about anymore, yawned. A real yawn. He frowned at it, because of course he did. "What's that about?" he muttered, annoyed by his own body. Sleep had returned to the town like a rumor, quiet, unannounced, slightly suspicious. By mid-morning, people had begun to notice. Not excitement, nothing like that, just small comments. "You look rested. Did you sleep better? Strange dreams last night." One woman mentioned she dreamed of her childhood garden. Another spoke of hearing a song her mother used to hum. Nobody connected these moments, yet. Elara spent the morning painting signs for a shop that had been opening soon for 14 years. The owner hovered nearby, offering tea she didn't ask for and advice she didn't need. "Your colors are softer lately," he said. She shrugged. "Paint changes," which was true, also deeply unhelpful. By afternoon, something happened that made ignoring the change impossible. A boy fell asleep in the square, not collapsed, not sick, just sat down beside the fountain and drifted off. People gathered, concerned at first. Someone shook him gently. He woke smiling. "I was flying," he said. That was when the whispers started. By evening, someone knocked on Elara's door. She wasn't expecting visitors. Nobody ever visited artists unless they wanted something cheap or strange. Sometimes both. She opened the door to find a woman she vaguely recognized. Pale coat, nervous eyes, hands clasped too tightly. "I heard you paint dreams," the woman said. Elara blinked. "I paint pictures," she replied carefully, because this was new. The woman nodded quickly. "Yes, that. But they're dreams." She swallowed. "My husband hasn't slept in 3 years." Elara hesitated. This was how stories started, and how trouble did too. "I'm not a healer," she said. "I know," the woman replied, "but neither is the moon, and it still helps." That was annoyingly poetic for someone standing in a doorway. Elara stepped aside. The woman entered, eyes drawn immediately to the walls. She froze when she saw the sleeping girl beneath the moon. Her breath caught. "That's her," she whispered. "Who?" "My daughter, before she died. Silence filled the room. Not heavy, just present. Elara felt something shift inside her chest. Not guilt, not pride. Something quieter. Recognition, maybe. "I didn't paint her," Elara said softly. "I painted sleep." The woman nodded, tears falling silently. "My husband needs that." Elara agreed to try. Because of course she did. This is always how it goes. That night, she painted again. Not carefully, not thoughtfully, just honestly. She painted a man lying beneath autumn trees, his hands finally unclenched, leaves drifting down like forgiveness. The next morning, the woman returned. Her husband slept. For 12 hours. The town noticed. From that moment, the requests came softly at first. A knock here. A letter slipped under the door. A hesitant question asked as if apologizing for existing. Elara painted dreams of rest, dreams of warmth, dreams of memory. The town began to change, slowly. Windows opened earlier. Laughter returned in smaller, more believable doses. The square felt lighter, like something invisible had been moved. And Elara? She grew tired, not the good kind. She began dreaming things she didn't paint, faces she didn't recognize, places that didn't exist. One night, she dreamed of a painting she had not made yet. A vast canvas, a town bathed in moonlight, and a shadow at the edge of it, watching. Of course there was, because dreams never arrive alone, and neither does magic. Let's pause here for a moment. Breathe in, breathe out. In the next part, we'll drift deeper into what happens when a town begins to rely on dreams, and what it costs the one who paints them. For now, just let the story settle, like paint drying, quietly. By the time autumn truly settled in, the town had stopped pretending something unusual wasn't happening. You know how towns are. They notice things. They gossip. They whisper behind lace curtains and over lukewarm tea. But they also have a remarkable ability to ignore the obvious if acknowledging it would require effort. And effort, frankly, is exhausting. Still, it was hard to ignore the small changes that kept drifting through the streets like fallen leaves. It began with sleep. People started sleeping better, not dramatically better. No one was leaping out of bed shouting about revelations. It was quieter than that, subtle. The kind of improvement that only shows itself when you suddenly realize you don't dread bedtime anymore. The baker stopped waking up at 3 a.m. to worry about flour prices. He slept straight through until dawn, which for him was basically a miracle on par with loaves multiplying themselves. The school teacher stopped dreaming about unfinished lessons and missing students. Instead, she dreamed of walking through forests she didn't recognize, her hands brushing leaves that glowed softly, like they remembered sunlight. And yes, she woke up confused, but not upset, just calm, which was new. Of course, the town didn't connect this to the woman in the narrow house with the north-facing windows. That would have required logic, or curiosity, or admitting that magic might exist, which people prefer not to do unless it comes with instructions. But Ilara noticed. She noticed because her hands had started to ache, not painfully, just a dull, persistent soreness, like they were tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. She stretched her fingers every morning, watching the lights spill across her work table, noticing how the paintings leaned closer together now. They weren't supposed to move. Paintings, generally speaking, stay put. That's kind of their whole thing. But hers had begun to shift, just slightly, as if drawn toward one another, as if they shared something private and wanted to whisper about it when she wasn't looking. Ilara didn't ask why. This was one of her habits. When something strange happened, she accepted it first and questioned it later, or never. It had served her well so far. She picked up her brush and began another canvas. This one was quieter than the others. No glowing skies, no drifting staircases, just a small room with a window open to autumn air. A bed, a folded blanket, the suggestion of warmth without showing its source. She painted it slowly, carefully, like she was afraid of waking it. And somewhere across town, a woman who hadn't slept properly in years finally rested without dreams at all. Just deep, soft darkness. The good kind. The kind forests have beneath their roots. Because sometimes the absence of dreams is the gift. Of course, not everyone welcomed the changes. There's always someone who notices peace and immediately suspects a trick. In this town, it was the mayor. He was a man who had inherited his position, which explained a lot about his confidence and very little about his competence. He wore coats that were too heavy for the season and expressions that suggested mild disappointment with reality. He noticed that people were calmer. Calm people ask fewer questions, which sounds ideal. But calm people also stop needing you as much. And that, for a man like him, felt deeply suspicious. He started taking evening walks, not for pleasure, heaven forbid, but to observe, to reassure himself that the town was still behaving normally, which it wasn't, but not in any way he could formally complain about. He passed Ilara's house one evening, just as the lanterns were being lit. The light in her window was different, not brighter, not dimmer, just warmer, like it knew something. He paused. He frowned. He told himself he was imagining things. Of course he was, because the alternative was admitting that something beautiful and uncontrollable was happening under his watch. And mayors hate that. Inside, Ilara stepped back from her latest painting. She felt it then, a faint pull, like a thread being drawn tight inside her chest. It wasn't unpleasant, just firm, insistent. She touched the canvas. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she heard breathing, slow, even, as if someone, somewhere, had finally let go. She smiled. Outside, autumn leaves slid along the street, carried by a wind that smelled like rain and old stories. And the town, whether it knew it or not, was beginning to dream together. Not loudly, not dangerously, just enough to change everything. Very slowly, very quietly, and like all the best transformations, it would take a while before anyone realized there was no going back. Leaves gathered more carefully along the roads, curling into deliberate shapes instead of chaotic piles. The baker swore his bread tasted warmer, though he couldn't explain how that was possible when ovens worked the same way they always had. And the clock in the town square, which had been broken for years, began ticking again. Slowly, politely, as if asking permission. No one mentioned the paintings. Well, almost no one. The mayor, for instance, noticed. He noticed everything. Or rather, he believed he did, which was arguably worse. He was a thin man with a voice that sounded like it had been trained to speak indoors. He wore coats even when it wasn't cold, possibly to look important, possibly because he was always a little uncomfortable in his own skin. He had not slept well since the first painting appeared in the window. Not because of nightmares. No, that would have been interesting. His problem was something far more inconvenient. He kept dreaming of being young, not dramatically young, not tragically so, just capable, standing straighter, breathing without effort, walking without his knees announcing every movement like a formal complaint. In the dreams, he wandered streets he half recognized, streets that looked like the town but slightly kinder. The buildings leaned inward as if listening. Lanterns glowed without flickering. And somewhere, always just out of sight, someone was painting. He woke each morning irritated and unsettled, because nostalgia is an emotion that never asks permission. And the mayor disliked anything he couldn't regulate. By mid-autumn, he decided to pay her a visit. The studio door was unlocked, as always. It creaked softly, not from neglect, but from age. The kind of age that carries memory rather than decay. Inside, the smell of oil, paint, and old wood lingered gently. The woman stood near the far wall, her back turned, brush moving in slow, deliberate strokes. She did not turn when he entered. "Good morning," he said, too loudly. Of course he did. "Good morning," she replied, without stopping. There was something unsettling about how calm she sounded, not dismissive, not polite, just complete, as if his presence had been expected but not particularly anticipated. He cleared his throat. "I've been receiving comments." She nodded. "That makes sense. People are talking," he continued, "about your paintings." "They usually do." He frowned. This was not how official conversations were supposed to go. There should have been nervousness, apologies, maybe tea. "And these dreams," he said carefully. "People are having them." She set the brush down and finally turned. Her face was unremarkable in the way that landscapes often are, not plain, not striking, just balanced, like something meant to be looked at slowly. "Yes," she said, "they are." "That concerns me," he said, leaning into the word like it might give him authority. She studied him for a moment, eyes gentle, almost curious. "Why?" He hesitated. Because order depended on predictability. Because dreams were personal and uncontrollable. Because he did not like waking up feeling like a memory had borrowed his bones. Instead, he said, "Change makes people restless." She smiled faintly. "So does stagnation." The mayor had no response to that. He left shortly afterward, unsettled but unchanged, which was perhaps the most unsettling outcome of all. Outside, the town continued its quiet transformation. A woman who had not spoken to her sister in 10 years dreamed of a shared childhood room, sunlight spilling across mismatched beds. The next morning, she wrote a letter without knowing why. A widower dreamed of dancing beneath falling leaves with a woman whose face he could no longer remember. He woke crying softly, but not from pain, from gratitude. And always, somewhere in the background of these dreams, there were colors, slow strokes, the sense of being observed, not judged, not guided, simply witnessed. Romance returned to the town in small, embarrassing ways. Hands brushing too long, lingering glances at the market, a shared umbrella in unexpected rain. Nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded songs or poems, just the quiet reminder that closeness was still possible. Autumn deepened. Golds became rust. Air sharpened. And the painter continued her work. She painted dreams people had forgotten they once needed. Not happiness, not success, just rest. Because some towns do not need saving. They need remembering. No dramatic windstorms, no cinematic rain. Just a soft, slow agreement between the trees and the sidewalks that it was time to let go. Leaves fell like they were tired, which, honestly, felt relatable. Elara noticed this first while walking to her studio one morning, wrapped in a coat that had definitely seen better decades. The trees along the canal had begun shedding gold and rust, and the water carried the reflections downstream like it was cataloguing memories for later use. She paused on the bridge because, of course, she did. People who paint dreams tend to pause a lot. Below her, the canal shimmered faintly. Not magically, not in a chosen one kind of way, just attentive, as if it were listening. That had been happening more often lately. The world around Elara wasn't changing loudly. It was changing the way old houses change, one creak at a time, one forgotten corner waking up. Inside her studio, the walls had begun to feel closer, not smaller, warmer, like they were leaning in. She hadn't painted the same kind of dream twice in weeks. At first, she thought she was losing control, which, fair. Artists tend to assume that first. But when she looked back through her earlier canvases, the ones stacked carefully against the wall, she noticed something odd. The older dreams stayed contained. They lived where she put them, like well-behaved stories. The newer ones lingered. A painting of a sunlit staircase still smelled faintly of dust and citrus. A canvas showing a child sleeping under drifting stars hummed quietly at night, like a memory replaying itself. And then there was the harbor dream. She hadn't planned that one. It had arrived halfway through a sleepless evening, her brush moving faster than her thoughts. A shoreline under lavender skies, lanterns floating not upward but outward, drifting across the water like invitations no one had formally accepted. The next morning, the real harbour, the very real, very practical harbour, had lanterns bobbing along its edge. No one questioned it, which, frankly, was the most unsettling part. People accepted the changes the way they accept weather. Mild curiosity, minimal panic, occasional commentary. "Well," said Mrs. Calder from the bakery, squinting at the lanterns. "That's new?" And then she went back inside to frost pastries shaped like moons. Romance had begun slipping into the town sideways. Not the dramatic kind. No grand declarations or tragic misunderstandings. Just closeness. Neighbors lingered longer. Hands brushed and didn't immediately retreat. Conversations stretched past their original purpose. Elara noticed couples sitting closer on benches. She noticed how people looked at each other when they thought no one else was watching. Softer, like they'd remembered something important and forgotten the words for it. Magic does that sometimes. It doesn't announce itself. It rearranges priorities. Of course, not everyone was comfortable. There was Councilman Hearth, for example, a man whose idea of wonder was a well-balanced ledger. He stood in Elara's studio one afternoon, hat in hand, staring at a painting of two figures dancing under falling leaves that never touched the ground. "This is all very impressive," he said carefully, which is politician speak, for I am deeply uncomfortable but trying to sound polite. Elara smiled, because she always did. "Thank you." He cleared his throat. "People are saying the town feels different." She tilted her head. "Different how?" Hearth hesitated. That pause stretched. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. "They're sleeping better," he finally said, like it offended him personally. Elara blinked. "That's bad?" "No," he admitted. "It's just unusual." He gestured vaguely. "Dreams shouldn't affect zoning regulations." Elara almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she nodded. "Dreams don't follow maps." That ended the conversation. Because what do you even say to that? That night, Elara dreamed, truly dreamed, not painted, for the first time in months. She stood in a long hallway filled with doors. Each one was painted differently. Some glowed faintly. Others were dull, worn. Their colors faded like old postcards. A voice spoke, not loud, not commanding. "Just tired. You're opening too many at once." Elara turned. No one was there. "Then maybe they shouldn't have been locked," she said, because she had always talked back to her dreams. The hallway shifted. Doors rearranged themselves. Some vanished entirely. When she woke, the taste of copper and rain lingered in her mouth. Outside, the town clock had stopped. Not broken, just resting. People gathered around it in the square, murmuring softly, like you do around someone sleeping. No one tried to fix it. Time, it seemed, had decided to breathe. Elara walked among them, unnoticed. She felt it then, the weight of it, the quiet pressure behind her eyes. Every dream she painted stayed. They didn't fade. They didn't dissolve. They layered. The town wasn't becoming something new. It was remembering itself. That realization followed her back to the studio where she stood before, a blank canvas, and hesitated for the first time. Because magic, romance, autumn, they were all beautiful. But beauty accumulates, and eventually something has to hold it. She dipped her brush anyway. Of course she did. Somewhere, the canal reflected a sky that hadn't happened yet, and the town leaned in, listening, waiting to see what she would remember next. If you've settled in again, blanket adjusted, lights low, thoughts already drifting, then good. Because this is the part where the town, very slowly, begins to realize something odd is happening. Not all at once, of course. Nothing ever happens all at once in towns like this. By now, the woman who painted dreams had been living above her studio long enough that people stopped asking where she came from, which is usually the first sign that a town has accepted something quietly impossible. No one remembered her arrival clearly. They remembered after she arrived, as if she had always been there, tucked between the bakery and the shop that sold clocks no one ever bought. Autumn leaned harder into the streets. Leaves pressed themselves into corners. The air smelled faintly of apples and old paper. And at night, when windows glowed one by one, the dreams she painted began drifting outward, slow as breath on cold glass. It started with the baker. He was a large man with a permanently tired face and hands that smelled like flour even after washing them 3 times. He hadn't dreamed properly in years. Not nightmares, just nothing. Sleep, then morning. A blank stretch of darkness, like forgetting to turn the lights on in your own head. One night, he dreamed of his father. Not the tired version near the end, the younger one, laughing, flour on his beard, teaching him how to knead dough without tearing it. When the baker woke up, his pillow was damp, and for a long moment he didn't move. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like something had been returned to him without explanation. Later that day, he walked past the dream painter's window. He didn't go in, he just slowed down, looked, and kept walking. That's how it worked. The school teacher dreamed next. She dreamed of a classroom that smelled of chalk and rain, filled with children who listened, which, of course, had never existed. But in the dream, it felt so real that waking up was disappointing in a soft, manageable way. The mayor dreamed too. He would never admit it. Of course he wouldn't. But he dreamed of the town exactly as it was now. Quiet, calm, unremarkable, and felt a strange sense of relief. No speeches, no disasters, just streets doing what streets do. And that's when it became clear. The dreams weren't changing people dramatically. They weren't making anyone famous or powerful or especially happy. They were doing something much more dangerous. They were making people gentle. The dream painter noticed, of course. She noticed everything. She noticed how people lingered longer in doorways, how arguments softened halfway through, how couples who hadn't spoken in years suddenly shared silence that felt companionable. She painted less during the day now, not because she was tired, but because the nights had become busy. Sometimes she dreamed too. That surprised her. She dreamed of a long hallway filled with doors, each door painted with a different color. Some cracked, some sealed, some trembling softly, like something inside wanted out. She always woke before opening any of them. Romance drifted in quietly. It always does. A man who repaired shoes began dreaming of a woman who didn't exist. Or maybe she did, once. In the dream, she waited on a bridge at sunset, wearing a coat the color of dried leaves. He began walking slower in real life, as if afraid to arrive too quickly anywhere. A woman who sold second-hand books dreamed of hands brushing hers as they reached for the same spine. When she woke, she rearranged her shop without knowing why, made space where space hadn't existed before. The dream painter painted none of this directly. She painted landscapes, rooms, windows, empty chairs by firelight. And somehow, that was enough. People began sleeping deeper. The nights stretched, time loosened its grip, and the town, this quiet, forgettable place, began to feel as though it was being remembered by something larger than itself. Not everyone liked it. There's always someone. An older woman complained that her dreams were too vivid now, that waking felt heavier, that the past was pressing closer than she preferred. A man said he missed the emptiness, said sleep used to be simple. The dream painter listened. She always listened, but she didn't stop, because something had shifted. And stopping now would have been like waking someone mid-sentence. One evening, as fog rolled in low and soft, the dream painter stood at her window and watched the street glow amber under the lamps. She felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She understood then that the town wasn't just receiving dreams anymore. It was responding. Dreams were being returned, not to her, not directly, but to the air, to the walls, to the spaces between people. And somewhere deep inside her, quiet, careful, patient, she felt the first warning stir. Not fear, just the knowledge that when a town begins to dream together, it eventually wants to dream back. By the time autumn had fully committed to itself, trees shedding leaves with quiet confidence, the air smelling faintly of apples and damp paper, the town had reached a strange agreement with the paintings. No one said it out loud. No town hall meeting. No overly long speeches by people who like the sound of their own voice. It was simply understood. Some dreams were allowed to stay. Not all of them, just a few. Elara knew this because people had stopped asking her to remove certain paintings. The bakery kept the one where bread loaves glowed gently at dawn, always warm, never burned. The baker pretended he didn't believe in magic, of course. He told everyone it was just good ovens. The ovens disagreed quietly by never breaking again. The post office kept the painting where letters always arrived on the right day, never early, never late. The postmaster claimed it was improved routing. He said this while staring at the painting like it might blink. And the small house at the edge of town, the one with the creaking porch and the widow who spoke mostly to her cat, kept the painting of her late husband sitting by the fire, reading without coughing, without pain. He never spoke. He never moved. He simply existed, and that apparently was enough. Elara didn't argue. She had learned by now that arguing with longing was pointless. Of course, not everyone was content. There were still whispers, always whispers. People talked about dependency, about what would happen if Elara left, about whether dreams that stayed too long would rot, like fruit forgotten in a drawer. One man, there's always one man, claimed the paintings were eroding the moral backbone of the town, though no one was entirely sure when he had last seen a moral backbone in the wild. Elara listened. She always listened, but she kept painting, because something had changed. The dreams were no longer just becoming real. They were becoming careful. Earlier dreams had been bold, obvious, almost showy. Bridges that repaired themselves overnight. Weather that behaved suspiciously well during weddings. Memories returning with cinematic flair. Now, the dreams were smaller, subtler. A woman dreamed of sleeping through the night without waking in panic. The painting showed a dark room and steady breathing. Nothing flashy, but it worked. A child dreamed of a father who came home earlier. The painting showed a clock, hands gently shifting. No explanation, no miracle. Just time rearranging itself politely. Elara noticed that when she painted now, the brush felt lighter, as if the dreams were meeting her halfway. Romance, too, had changed. It always does. Once, love dreams had been dramatic. Fireworks, rain-soaked reunions, the sort of thing that looks great in a frame but is exhausting to live through. Now, people dreamed of quiet love, shared silence, familiar footsteps, someone reaching for your hand without looking. One evening, Elara painted a dream she hadn't meant to paint. It happened accidentally, which is usually how important things happen, of course. She had been cleaning her brushes, half asleep, thinking about nothing in particular when her hand moved on its own. The canvas filled with soft twilight colors. A room. 2 chairs. One empty, one not. The dream was simple. Someone waiting. Not desperately, not sadly, just waiting. When Elara realized what she had painted, she froze, because the dream was hers. She didn't hang it. She leaned it against the wall, facing inward, like a secret. Outside, the town continued its quiet transformation. Leaves gathered in corners that never needed sweeping. People walked slower. Conversations lasted longer. Regrets lost their sharp edges. It wasn't perfect. Some dreams still failed. Some paintings never activated, remaining just paint and hope. Elara had learned not to force those. Dreams, like people, sometimes needed to remain unreal. And then there was the night the paintings didn't change anything at all. It was late, the moon low, autumn fully settled into its creaks and sighs. A man knocked on Elara's door. He was young, but tired in a way that suggested he had skipped several stages of optimism. He carried no dream object, no photograph, no token. "I don't know what to ask for," he said. Elara nodded. "That's usually the honest ones." He hesitated. "Can you paint? Nothing changing?" That stopped her. He explained slowly, like someone unused to being understood. His life wasn't tragic. It wasn't dramatic. It was just always about to fall apart. Every good thing came with a countdown. Every calm moment felt borrowed. "I want one day," he said, "just one, where nothing happens." Elara painted it. A plain street, overcast sky, no surprises. The next day, the town noticed something strange. Nothing. No small miracles, no subtle shifts. Just a day that passed like a deep breath. And when it ended, the man smiled, for the first time anyone could remember, and said, "That was enough." Elara realized then that the town wasn't changing because of magic. It was changing because people were learning what they actually needed, which is, frankly, rare. As she closed her studio that night, autumn pressing gently against the windows, Elara glanced at the painting she kept hidden. The waiting one. It had changed, barely. A second chair had appeared, and for the first time since she arrived in town, Elara felt something close to rest. Let's drift onward. The dreams aren't done yet. Cobblestone that seemed smoother, worn by invisible footsteps. A lamplighter who lingered a beat longer under the amber glow. Windows that caught the moonlight differently, as if some secret hand had polished the glass while the world slept. She poured her paint onto canvases with a calm, deliberate rhythm, her brushstrokes almost meditative. Each color seemed to hum with its own gentle magic. She realized that painting a dream was not simply imagining it, it was listening to it. The dreams whispered to her in hushed tones, revealing corners of the town and its people she had never truly seen. At the market, the baker now set out loaves that smelled like memories. The warm scent of a childhood kitchen, the comfort of laughter at a table long gone. People paused mid-step, inhaling deeply, though they could not have known why the aroma made their hearts swell. The painter understood then that dreams were not only her gift, they were a reflection of longing, nostalgia, and hope, all woven into the fabric of reality. And yet, there were challenges. Some dreams were unruly, stubborn, resistant to form. A particularly tempestuous painting of a silver river refused to shimmer. No matter how she adjusted her strokes, the water on canvas rippled with a mind of its own. She chuckled quietly, a low, sleepy sound, because of course it was difficult. It was a dream she had yet to understand. Even in her solitude, the painter felt the weight of responsibility. Townsfolk were changing, though they were unaware. The mayor now paused before decisions, as if some invisible clarity had settled in his mind. Children played more freely, their laughter carrying hints of melodies she had painted. Love bloomed quietly between neighbors who had once merely nodded in passing. Her art had become the quiet heartbeat of the town. One evening, as the wind whispered against the window panes and the amber glow of lanterns spread warmth across cobblestones, she paused. In the corner of her studio, a blank canvas awaited. It called to her differently than the others, urgent but gentle, commanding yet tender. She set her palette and dipped her brush, letting the colors flow as if the town itself guided her hand. Every stroke brought forth a vision, a child standing beneath a tree whose leaves glittered like stars, a couple holding hands on a quiet bridge, the river now sparkling under a moonlit sky. It was a scene of quiet perfection, yet it was unfinished, not because she lacked skill, but because dreams are never truly complete. They evolve, shift, and breathe, just like those who hold them. And so, she painted late into the night, the town slumbering beneath her care. Outside, the wind rustled, carrying the scent of autumn and the soft magic of unseen dreams. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. Somewhere else, a cat slinked along a quiet street, its eyes catching the reflections of a world that had begun to change quietly, beautifully, because a woman dared to paint dreams into existence. By the time the first grey light of morning touched the rooftops, the painter leaned back, her brush resting gently on the palette. The town had shifted imperceptibly. No one could see it outright, but everyone could feel it, a subtle calm, a softening of the world, a gentle reminder that magic need not shout to be real. She smiled, a sleepy smile, and whispered to herself, "We are only just beginning." And with that, the dream painter set her brush aside, allowing herself a moment of rest, knowing the town's dreams and her own would continue to unfold with the quiet patience of the night. Morning light stretched lazily across the town, painting the cobblestones with a honeyed glow. The townsfolk moved with a subtle shift in their pace, a gentle rhythm that had not been there before. The baker hummed while kneading dough, and the notes lingered, soft and golden, as though touched by the brush of a dream. Children chased each other through alleys, their laughter drifting like petals in the wind. The dream painter watched from her studio, sipping tea that steamed faintly, carrying the aroma of cinnamon and autumn leaves. She realized that each painting, each stitch of color and shadow, was not simply altering the town. It was teaching her about patience. Some dreams were stubborn, resistant to her gentle coaxing. Others came alive with a mere whisper of her brush. She had learned to wait, to observe, and to allow the magic to settle into the world on its own time. There was a rhythm to it, like the quiet pulse of the moon over water, steady, enduring. The next canvas she approached was not for the town, but for herself. She wanted to understand her own dreams, the ones that lingered in the quiet corners of her mind. The brush trembled slightly in her hand, not from fatigue, but from anticipation. As the colors touched the canvas, the scene revealed a hidden garden, tucked between hills she had never walked, where trees bore lanterns instead of fruit, and vines curled in slow, elegant spirals. A soft wind whispered through the branches, carrying fragments of music that seemed impossibly old yet familiar. She painted a figure stepping through the garden, a boy whose eyes reflected curiosity and wonder, whose hands reached toward every shimmering leaf as if to grasp a story itself. He moved carefully, yet with an unspoken eagerness, and the painter noticed the way the garden responded. Flowers leaning closer, lanterns flickering brighter, and the ground beneath him shimmering as if made of liquid silver. The dream painter smiled softly, remembering the first night she had realized that her art could shape reality. Each dream she had stitched into the town had been a rehearsal, a gentle practice, preparing her for moments like this. Here, in the quiet sanctuary of her own imagination, she could explore without restraint, without concern for the world outside. Yet even here, the boundary between dream and reality felt thinner than ever. As the afternoon waned, the townspeople passed by the studio, unaware of the subtle changes their lives were undergoing. A street musician's song now carried the timbre of distant oceans. A young couple paused on a bridge, exchanging glances that seemed to stretch longer than memory itself. The painter felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, though she did not think of it as pride. It was more a feeling of harmony, like breathing in a rhythm she had only just begun to recognize. Nightfall approached with the gentle hush of autumn. Lanterns flickered, casting soft shadows across the streets. She returned to the boy in the garden, adding final touches, a glimmer of starlight in his eyes, a whisper of wind through the lantern-laden branches. The painting pulsed with life, as if the garden were waiting for someone to truly step inside, to understand the way dreams could echo across worlds. For the first time, the dream painter felt a sense of anticipation, mingled with quiet trepidation. She knew that soon, someone, or something, would step into the visions she had crafted. And when that moment arrived, the delicate balance between her world and the one she painted would shift. Not violently, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, beautifully. As always, she leaned back in her chair, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain-soaked earth, the soft rustle of leaves, and the hum of magic that had been building for months. Somewhere beyond the town, the first stars winked awake in the dusky sky, as if nodding to her work. And as she closed her eyes, letting herself drift into a soft reverie, the painter whispered, "We are ready for what comes next." The night held its breath, waiting, patient, endless. The next morning arrived softly, like a sigh stretched across the horizon. Light spilled through the studio window, catching on motes of dust that floated lazily in the air. The dream painter, Dream, sat before her latest canvas, her hands steady now, almost meditative. The town outside moved in its usual quiet rhythm, though subtle changes had begun to ripple through it, unnoticed by all but the most attentive eyes. A stray leaf spiraled past a lamppost, caught in a gentle wind, and the air seemed just a shade sweeter, warmer, more luminous. She picked up her brush and began to paint the market square. Normally, it was a place of ordinary comings and goings, merchants calling out their wares, children chasing one another, the occasional dog slinking between legs. But today, each brushstroke wove in something extraordinary. She painted a fountain, its waters sparkling with hues of forgotten dreams, liquid silver that seemed to hum softly, as if carrying a melody only the heart could hear. The fountain's basin shimmered, reflecting not just the town but possibilities that had never been imagined, hidden within the folds of her mind. A young boy wandered through the square in her painting, the same boy she had seen in her secret garden. His footsteps echoed softly, blending with the music of the fountain. The painter added small details, a fluttering scarf around his neck, a glint of curiosity in his eye, the way his shadow leaned toward him like a loyal companion. Each addition felt alive, responsive, as though the boy could sense the world forming around him even before it existed. Outside, in the actual town, the market carried a subtle shift. The baker, unaware of any magic, placed a small basket of golden pastries in his window. The scent wove through the air, light and comforting, and the townspeople paused, each breathing a little deeper, smiling a little wider. A merchant opened a shop of fabrics that shimmered faintly under the morning sun. Children laughed as if recalling a memory they had never had, chasing invisible ribbons that fluttered in the corners of perception. The painter added one final touch to the square, a bench, worn but inviting, where a few townsfolk could pause, rest, and listen, not to the hum of everyday life, but to the quiet magic threading through the world. She realized then that her role was not merely to create dreams, but to teach the town to notice them, to let them settle gently into reality. As afternoon approached, clouds drifted lazily across the sky, their edges tinged with gold. She turned her attention to the edges of her canvas, painting soft corners where the magic seemed to pool, where the boundaries between imagination and reality blurred. Here, a stray cat padded silently across the cobblestones, its eyes reflecting the colors of the fountain. There, an elderly man paused by a lamppost, thinking he had glimpsed something familiar but not quite explainable. The painter's thoughts drifted back to the boy. He was learning, she realized, just as much as the town. Each step he took, each glance he cast, shaped the world around him. And yet, she understood something vital. The magic did not belong to her alone. It was not simply her paintings, her dreams, her visions. It belonged to anyone willing to notice, to feel, to imagine, to remember. As evening drew near, the square in the painting glowed with a warm amber light, the kind of light that wraps around the soul and encourages quiet reflection. She stepped back, breathing in the scent of her paints, the soft hum of the town outside, and the lingering music of her own imagination. Somewhere between the brushstrokes and reality, the world was learning to dream again. Slowly, quietly, beautifully. The night approached, and the painter allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Tomorrow would bring new streets to wander, new figures to meet, new dreams to stitch into the quiet rhythm of the town. And for now, she let herself linger in the comfort of what had already been created. A town not merely seen, but felt. A town not merely lived in, but remembered in its finest, subtlest details. Outside, The first stars Giti peeked through the dusky sky, shy, patient, waiting to witness the next brushstroke. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of imagination, the boy looked up, sensing that the world had shifted ever so slightly, softly, gently, beautifully. Night had fallen fully over the town, though it carried no harsh shadows, only soft, muted tones as if the world itself had been wrapped in a gentle blanket. The painter remained at her studio window, gazing down at the streets she had begun to transform. The cobblestones reflected a faint luminescence, a residue of dreams that had already touched the waking world. Somewhere, far above, the stars seemed to hesitate, peeking through a misty veil, as if curious about what human hands could coax from imagination. She turned back to her canvas, where the boy had grown bolder, wandering through alleys she had not yet imagined. His path was tentative at first, careful, as if he sensed that the world around him could crumble with one misstep. But the painter's brush encouraged him, guiding his steps with subtle light and gentle curves. A lantern flickered into existence on a narrow corner, its glow reflecting in puddles that shimmered like liquid amber. She painted the soft ripple of water beneath the lantern's glow, noting how even the smallest details seemed to breathe. A soft wind whispered through the studio, carrying with it scents she could not name. Hints of apple blossoms from a spring she had not yet painted, the faint smoke of fires from imaginary chimneys, the distant melody of a song almost remembered. She smiled to herself, thinking that this was the true beauty of her work. A quiet world layered beneath the surface of the familiar, waiting only for those willing to pause and notice. The boy paused at the edge of the fountain she had painted. He leaned over, peering into the water, and for a moment the painting seemed to tremble, as if the reflection itself were alive. In that reflection, he saw not just his own face, but fleeting glimpses of the town's hidden stories. A merchant's lost love, a child's forgotten laughter, a cat that had once wandered through a garden that no longer existed. Each memory shimmered briefly, then dissolved into the silver liquid of the fountain. The painter dipped her brush in muted lavender and traced the edges of these reflections, giving them form, a quiet permanence. She realized that the town was learning to dream even without her brush. Every glance the boy cast, every ripple in the fountain stirred something unseen but deeply felt. Outside, the town settled into a softer rhythm. The baker had placed warm bread outside the shop for anyone passing by. The scent curled into the air, mixing with the cool evening breeze, and a few passers-by paused, inhaling deeply, remembering perhaps for the first time in a long while how small comforts could carry vast worlds within them. A cat padded through the alleys, its tail flicking with quiet satisfaction as if approving of the night's changes. The painter leaned back from her work, hands resting lightly on the table, and allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had begun this not merely to paint dreams, but to teach attention, patience, and quiet wonder. The boy's journey mirrored the town's awakening, and yet she knew the most profound transformations were subtle. A shadow shifting in the lamplight, a distant melody remembered, a smile appearing without conscious thought. As midnight approached, the lanterns in her painting flickered gently, a soft, pulsing light that seemed to echo the town's heartbeat. The boy, now comfortable in the world she had created, wandered slowly back toward the square. He paused at the bench she had added earlier, his eyes wide, thoughtful. It was a place to rest, to notice, to breathe. And as he sat, the fountain's waters shimmered brighter, reflecting not only the town but the dreams stitched into its very fabric. For the painter, the night was quiet and unhurried. She leaned against the window frame, listening to the soft hum of life outside, feeling the pulse of the town beneath her fingertips. Tomorrow would bring new dreams, new figures, and new ways for the town to discover itself. But tonight, the magic was subtle, almost invisible, and that was exactly how it should be. Quiet, patient, beautiful. Somewhere far above, a star twinkled faintly, a silent witness to the unfolding narrative below. And somewhere, in the deepest corners of imagination, the boy realized that he had begun to understand. The world was not fixed. It could be shaped, nurtured, and stitched together with care, one small, quiet act at a time. The painter returned to her canvas, brush poised, as if listening to the town's whispered stories. And the night stretched on, soft, endless, and alive with possibility. The first light of dawn crept lazily over the town, filtering through the mist that had settled overnight. It was not a harsh light, the kind that demands attention and pulls one abruptly from dreams, but a soft, amber glow that made even the simplest objects glimmer with quiet possibility. The boy awoke on the bench by the fountain, his eyes tracing the gentle ripples of the water. He had slept there, wrapped in a blanket of stars from the painting, and for a moment he wondered if he had been dreaming within a dream. From her studio, the painter watched him with a gentle smile. She had not painted this part, at least not yet. It was the town asserting its own quiet life, a slow rhythm of waking, stretching, and noticing. A few merchants emerged from the alleys, setting up their carts with goods that seemed ordinary but carried traces of magic. Jars of bottled sunlight, pouches of forgotten songs, ribbons that smelled faintly of autumn leaves. Each item seemed to whisper to the boy, inviting him to remember things he had never truly forgotten. He wandered past the bakery, inhaling the warm scent of bread mingling with the dew. A small cat brushed against his leg, and he reached down, fingers curling gently into the soft fur. The cat meowed softly, almost approvingly, and then padded off, tail high, as if guiding him somewhere. The boy followed, curiosity nudging him toward the narrow lanes where the painter's subtle magic had already begun to weave life into the town. A gentle wind stirred the leaves of the trees that bordered the square. Their branches swayed, and the boy noticed for the first time the tight lanterns hanging from them. Lanterns he had never seen before. Each lantern glowed faintly, filled with colors that seemed to breathe and pulse, casting shifting reflections on the cobblestones. He reached out, brushing a finger against one, and the glow responded, brightening slightly as if acknowledging his presence. The painter returned to her canvas, tracing the edges of a new scene she had barely imagined. A musician appeared in her painting, seated on a low wall, plucking strings that vibrated not only in the air, but within the boy's chest. Each note seemed to awaken a memory, a forgotten birthday, a vanished friend, the taste of honey on a summer morning long ago. The boy closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, feeling the town's heart beat in tandem with his own. Across the square, the fountain shimmered, and the water's surface shifted to reveal fleeting images, moments from other people's lives, small joys and subtle regrets, memories half forgotten but never truly lost. The boy watched silently, understanding that the town itself was alive in ways he had never realized. Every reflection, every ripple, carried the weight of countless stories, each stitched into the fabric of the streets and alleys, of walls and windows, of lanterns and leaves. He paused at a narrow lane where the sunlight danced across a pile of autumn leaves. Their colors seemed exaggerated, impossibly vivid, like a painting yet to be completed. He knelt, letting his fingers brush through the leaves, feeling the crispness and warmth, sensing the soft magic lingering in them. It was not the painter's doing alone. This place had begun to awaken under his eyes, responding to his presence, his willingness to notice, to believe. The painter's brush hovered over the canvas, waiting, watching, following the boy's path through the town. She added subtle details, a curl of smoke from a chimney, a shadow stretching across a wall, a soft reflection in a puddle. Nothing was sudden, nothing demanding attention. Each stroke was patient, deliberate, letting the town and its boy awaken together in quiet harmony. The boy wandered into the marketplace, where stalls were draped with soft fabrics that seemed to hum with color. A merchant offered him a small vial of light captured at sunset, and he held it up, watching it swirl and glow. The painter painted the light spilling over the cobblestones, illuminating the footprints of those who had walked here before him, the unseen paths of townspeople who had forgotten how to notice. By the time the sun had fully risen, the town seemed to breathe gently, awake but unhurried. The boy paused in the center of the square, eyes wide, taking in the transformation. He realized he had become a part of the town's slow awakening, that his presence, his attention, was part of the painter's subtle magic. And somewhere high in her studio, the painter smiled, knowing that the boy was beginning to understand the quiet, gentle power of noticing, of breathing with the world, of letting dreams settle softly into reality. The afternoon unfolded like a lazy sigh over the town. Sunlight poured gently through the clouds, painting warm patches across rooftops and alleyways. The boy wandered slowly, savoring the quiet, noticing small details he would have overlooked before. The gentle sway of the bell above the baker's door, the soft rustle of paper as it shifted in a forgotten corner, the faint echo of laughter that seemed to linger in the air long after its source had vanished. Every small observation felt like a secret he had been entrusted with, a piece of the town's slow, careful magic. He passed the fountain again, watching the water twist and shimmer, revealing images he didn't quite understand. For a moment, a face appeared, a memory perhaps not his own. A child skipping stones across a river that no longer existed. A pair of old friends sharing a loaf of bread on a bench. A dog chasing after a ribbon carried by the wind. The boy reached out as if he could touch these fleeting moments, and the water rippled in response, soft and warm, inviting him to linger. The painter's presence was everywhere but unseen. A gentle brush of wind ruffled the boy's hair as he stepped into a narrow lane lined with lanterns that pulsed faintly with golden light. Each lantern seemed to hum softly, carrying a tune he felt in his chest more than heard. He paused beneath one, tracing the delicate metalwork with his fingers. Its glow shifted, painting the walls around him with colors that seemed impossibly alive. Deep crimsons, soft violets, autumnal ambers. It was as if the town itself was breathing, stretching, shifting imperceptibly under the painter's patient hand. A sudden movement drew his gaze upward. From the highest rooftop, a bird took flight, wings shimmering with hues that didn't exist in any ordinary rainbow. It circled once, twice, then dipped toward the marketplace, carrying something small in its beak, a scrap of music, a forgotten melody that the boy could almost hear. He followed, stepping lightly over cobblestones, until he reached the stall of a musician whose strings had begun to resonate on their own, vibrating in harmony with the bird's song. Each note felt like a whisper of memory, a gentle reminder of moments that had slipped away unnoticed. The boy reached out to touch the strings, and the air seemed to thrum with warmth. The melody wrapped around him, tugging at long-forgotten emotions. The soft ache of first curiosity, the quiet thrill of discovery, the bitter-sweet sting of a moment that was beautiful precisely because it could not last. He closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, feeling it ripple through his body like sunlight filtering through leaves. In that moment, he understood that the painter's gift was not simply in creating beauty. It was in coaxing the town and its people to notice, to remember, to awaken slowly to the richness of the world around them. He wandered on, past the bakery where a soft cloud of cinnamon and warmth drifted through the air, past the fountain that shimmered with images of lives intersecting in subtle, unexpected ways, past alleyways that seemed to bend slightly toward him as if guiding his path. Everything moved quietly, gracefully, yet with purpose, a subtle choreography of light and shadow, memory and possibility. Each step felt like both a journey and a pause, an invitation to linger, to breathe, to witness the unfolding magic. By the time he arrived at the square once more, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, gentle shadows. Lanterns flickered to life, glowing softly in preparation for evening. The painter had added touches only visible in this dimming light. A leaf that floated impossibly in mid-air, a reflection in a puddle that shifted independently of the boy's movement, a faint outline of a story that had yet to be told. He felt the quiet thrill of anticipation, sensing that the town's magic was not fixed, but ever-changing, responding to attention, curiosity, and care. He sat on the edge of the fountain, letting the evening settle around him. The air was cool but not chilling, filled with the scents of autumn, damp leaves, distant wood smoke, the faint sweetness of fruit ripening. The lanterns pulsed gently, bathing him in soft color, as if the town itself were breathing with him. He realized that the day had been full, yet unhurried, that he had moved through layers of memory and magic without even noticing the passage of time. It was as though he had been present not only in the town, but in countless small interwoven stories, each stitched delicately into the fabric of the streets, the fountain, the lanterns, the very air around him. And somewhere above, in her quiet studio, the painter leaned back from her canvas, watching him with satisfaction. She had begun with brushstrokes and pigments, but the boy had brought something essential to the unfolding tableau: awareness, presence, and the willingness to notice. The town, she knew, would continue to awaken in small, imperceptible ways, each moment guided by the gentle touch of attention and the soft persistence of beauty. And for the boy, the understanding deepened that sometimes the most profound magic was not the one conjured with skill or intent, but the one discovered in the quiet act of looking, listening, and allowing oneself to feel the subtle rhythm of the world. Evening settled gently over the town, like a soft cloak draped over rooftops and cobblestones. The boy stayed at the fountain, feeling the cool stone beneath his fingers, while shadows lengthened and stretched lazily across the square. The lanterns glowed brighter now, each one a tiny heartbeat in the quiet, breathing town. He noticed that the colors in their light shifted slightly as he moved, painting the walls in soft gradients of amber, rose, and violet. It was subtle, but the change made the world feel alive in a way he had never fully realized before. A small crowd had begun to gather in the square, drawn by the music that lingered, echoing through alleys and open windows. Each note seemed to stir memories that had lain dormant, gentle reminders of things people had forgotten. A smile shared long ago, the taste of a favorite treat, a scent that carried them back to another time. The boy watched as they paused mid-step, some closing their eyes to let the sound fill them, others turning to one another with knowing glances, silently acknowledging the strange, beautiful rhythm of the evening. From the corner of the square, the painter emerged quietly, a bundle of brushes and small pots of pigment in her hands. She moved with a careful deliberation, placing a brush in the boy's hand. "Would you like to try?" she asked softly. Her voice was a whisper against the backdrop of the town's gentle evening sounds, blending seamlessly with the hum of lanterns and music. The boy hesitated, then nodded, feeling the weight of the brush and the promise of possibility in his fingertips. Together, they painted on the air itself, or perhaps on some hidden layer of the world that only the attentive could see. With each stroke, colors shimmered into existence, revealing tiny scenes and memories suspended like ornaments in the evening air. A child swinging from a rope tied to a tree branch, an elderly couple sharing a quiet laugh over tea, a dog curling at the feet of its long-gone owner. The boy felt a strange serenity as he added to the scenes, understanding that these were not just pictures, but fragments of life, carefully preserved and celebrated by their attention. A breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke, rustling the papers and fabrics of the marketplace. Small objects began to levitate gently. A coin spun in midair, a ribbon drifted lazily like a cloud, a book opened itself to a random page. The painter laughed softly, a sound as light and calm as the wind, and the boy realized that the magic was not merely in the images, but in the way the world responded to their presence. Every small gesture, every mindful observation shaped the town subtly, coaxing it into an almost imperceptible dance of light, memory, and warmth. People in the square began to notice, moving more slowly, pausing longer, smiling with recognition at things that felt vaguely familiar. The boy's heart swelled as he understood the depth of the painter's gift. She did not simply create beauty. She invited awareness, patience, and reflection. Each moment became richer, layered with memory and imagination, a reminder that the world was full of quiet marvels, if only one chose to see them. As the night deepened, the fountain reflected the lantern's glow like a pool of liquid gold. The boy leaned closer, watching the tiny scenes ripple across the water. Each reflection seemed to tell a story within a story, and he realized that the painter had taught him something profound, that attention was magic, and that observing the world carefully could uncover wonders hidden in plain sight. The painter stepped back, letting him continue. She knew her work was not finished. Indeed, it never would be, but the boy's involvement had sparked a subtle transformation. The town was shifting quietly, imperceptibly, in ways that would make each day more vivid, each night more gentle. And for the boy there was a sense of calm he could not fully articulate, a soft glow of understanding that perhaps the most beautiful magic was the one shared, experienced, and noticed together. The evening wore on, and the square emptied slowly, each person returning to their home with a sense of lightness and wonder. The boy stayed for a moment longer, breathing deeply, absorbing the final notes of the music and the lingering warmth of the lantern's glow. The painter offered him a gentle smile, and without a word, he understood that this was a moment to be treasured, a memory he could carry forward, stitched delicately into his own life, like the brushstrokes that hovered invisibly in the air. Finally, he rose, brushing his hands together, and looked around the town with new eyes. He noticed the faint shimmer of magic in the corners of the streets, the way the leaves seemed to catch the lantern light differently, the subtle way shadows curved and danced as if alive. The world had changed, but not dramatically. Just enough for him to see it more fully, more patiently, more beautifully. And with that understanding, he turned toward home, carrying the quiet enchantment of the painter's world with him. A soft, unending glow that would continue to guide his footsteps long after the lanterns had dimmed. The boy's footsteps were soft on the cobblestones as he wandered through the quiet streets, carrying the faint warmth of the evening with him. Each house seemed to breathe in tandem with the town itself, the windows glowing like amber eyes in the gentle darkness. There was no hurry here, no pressing need to arrive anywhere. The night itself was a companion, stretching lazily over rooftops and alleyways, holding everything in a comfortable, languid embrace. From somewhere above, the faint hum of the painter's work drifted down. He paused to listen, realizing the music had changed. Slower now, softer, like a lullaby meant for the stars themselves. It wrapped around the town like mist, seeping into the cracks of walls and the spaces between lanterns. Even the leaves on the trees seemed to sway in quiet approval, rustling in patterns that felt both deliberate and accidental at once. The boy could not decide if it was the music guiding the town or the town guiding the music, and perhaps it did not matter. As he walked, he noticed traces of the painter's magic lingering in subtle forms. A piece of ribbon floated past him, twisting in the air before landing softly on the cobblestones. A small jar of colored dust, perhaps gold or pink, hovered a moment too long above a fence post, catching the lantern glow before settling. The boy bent to pick it up, feeling its weight in his hand, a reminder that even the tiniest gestures could carry beauty. Each object, Kiao, seemed to whisper stories that could be felt but not fully spoken, stories that belonged to both the town and the night, and in some small way to him. He arrived at the edge of the square, where the fountain still caught the lantern light. The painter was there, brushing air and water with strokes that left shimmering, almost invisible threads of color. Her concentration was calm, focused, as if she were weaving the very breath of the night into her work. The boy watched silently, hesitant to disturb the delicate harmony. And yet, the painter noticed him without turning. She offered a small, knowing smile, a gesture that conveyed trust and encouragement without a word. He stepped closer, dipping his fingers into the fountain water. The surface rippled, catching fragments of the painter's colors and scattering them across the stone in patterns that reminded him of constellations. He tried to mimic her earlier motions, brushing air in sweeping arcs. And to his quiet astonishment, colors began to shimmer into existence, forming delicate shapes of forgotten memories and imagined wonders. A small boat floated briefly above the water, carrying a tiny lantern. A bird perched on an invisible branch, singing a note that had never existed before. The boy laughed softly at the thought, though the sound barely rose above the gentle hum of the night. The painter spoke then, her voice a soft caress against the night. Each story we paint becomes part of the world, not just for us, but for everyone who notices, who slows down long enough to see. She gestured toward the town beyond the square. Do you see how the colors linger, how they shift with attention? Magic is not just about creation, it's about presence. The boy nodded slowly, feeling the truth in her words settle like warm sunlight in his chest. He moved his hands in wider arcs, more confidently now, and the night seemed to respond. Lanterns brightened and dimmed rhythmically, as if breathing in unison. Leaves fluttered in mesmerizing patterns, spinning slowly in circles and spirals. Small fragments of music emerged from the fountain's ripples, carrying faint echoes of laughter, whispered stories, and quiet sighs from people long gone. Time seemed to bend. The boy lost count of minutes, perhaps even hours, though in this town under the painter's care, time felt like a gentle stream rather than a rushing current. The night held him, the town, and the painter together in a calm, unending embrace. He understood then that this was not just magic, not just beauty. It was patience, attention, and the delicate art of noticing, of letting small wonders unfold without pressure or expectation. Finally, the painter stepped back, letting the boy's energy mingle with hers. The fountain reflected a constellation of tiny stories, each one shimmering and breathing as though alive. He realized with a quiet awe that the world had shifted slightly. The night seemed deeper, richer, more attentive, as if it too had learned to slow down and breathe. And in that moment, the boy understood something profoundly simple. Magic was not just in the painter's hands or in the colors she conjured. It was in seeing, feeling, and sharing the quiet marvels of the world, one soft, deliberate moment at a time. The lanterns flickered gently, casting a gentle warmth over the square. And as the boy watched, a tiny memory, perhaps his own, perhaps borrowed from the painter, floated to the surface, shimmering softly, waiting to be noticed. And he did, with full attention, letting it settle into the quiet rhythm of the night. A small, luminous fragment of wonder tucked into the folds of his own unfolding story. The boy lingered by the fountain, letting the cool water lap against his fingers, each ripple carrying a faint echo of the painter's colors. The night had grown deeper, but not darker. Shadows moved lazily, stretched by the gentle glow of lanterns and the painter's subtle magic. He felt as though he had stepped into a world where time had taken a deep, unhurried breath, and everything in it could unfold at its own pace. The painter leaned against the fountain's edge, watching him quietly. "Do you notice," she said softly, "how even the smallest gesture can change the rhythm of a night?" Her voice carried a calm, almost sleepy lilt, blending with the soft rustle of the leaves. A single brushstroke, a single note, can ripple farther than we imagine. The boy nodded, captivated by the way the colors from his earlier motions lingered in the air, forming delicate threads that wove themselves into the town. A lamppost seemed to sigh, shifting its glow ever so slightly. The fountain's water shimmered with new shapes, tiny floating figures, fragments of memories and dreams he had never seen before. Some resembled people he had known, some places he had imagined, and others were entirely fantastical. Floating castles, miniature forests, and luminous rivers that defied gravity. Magic, the painter continued, is rarely about spectacle. It is about noticing, about touching the forgotten, the delicate, the quiet. She held up her brush, and the boy saw tiny motes of color drift upward like dust in sunlight. Even memories you thought were lost can be painted back, if only you give them the right attention. He tried to mimic her motion again, sweeping his hands through the air with careful attention, coaxing subtle glimmers of forgotten stories into existence. A small boat drifted lazily across the fountain's surface, carrying tiny glowing orbs. A little girl in the air seemed to chase them, laughing silently. The boy felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet joy that had nothing to do with noise or excitement, but with the simple act of witnessing these tiny miracles. The painter smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "That's it," she whispered. "You don't need to force anything. The world is already full of stories. We only need to let them emerge." She gestured toward the town. Lanterns glowed brighter in soft, irregular pulses, as if acknowledging her words. Windows reflected fragments of color that moved with their own rhythm, forming patterns that reminded the boy of the constellations above. He felt his own heartbeat slow, syncing with the rhythm of the town and the painter's gentle presence. Somewhere far off, a cat padded along a rooftop, its shadow stretched long and graceful. The sound of the fountain mingled with faint, otherworldly music that seemed to rise from the cobblestones themselves. The boy realized that the entire town had become part of the painting, each detail infused with quiet magic that would linger long after anyone else had noticed. "Do you see?" the painter asked softly, "how everything responds when we pay attention?" He nodded, understanding that the night, the town, and the painter were intertwined, each lending subtle energy to the others. Even the faint rustle of the trees seemed deliberate, as if the forest itself had learned to dance in harmony with their slow, careful movements. The boy's hands moved again, tracing arcs of color in the air, forming shapes that were fleeting yet vivid. A tiny windmill turning without wind, a flock of luminous birds rising from the fountain, a staircase that seemed to climb into the stars. Each creation felt alive, delicate and ephemeral, an intimate conversation between the world and his imagination. The painter's voice, quiet and even, drifted into the night. "This is what I wanted you to understand. Magic is not always grand, not always obvious. Sometimes it is the slow work of noticing, the care we give to the small forgotten things. The night, the town, the people, they all carry stories waiting for gentle attention." He looked around him, seeing the subtle changes, the town breathing with a life he had never noticed before. Lanterns swayed slightly, as if sighing. The fountain shimmered with new reflections, and the air seemed to hold a gentle, expectant hush. He realized that every moment, every careful movement, every tiny gesture could leave a mark, no matter how delicate. And as the night deepened, the boy understood the painter's quiet truth. Magic was not in controlling the world, but in paying attention, in opening one's eyes to the stories already present, in giving them the space to emerge, and in sharing the quiet wonder of them with anyone willing to notice. By the time the first pale light of dawn touched the town, the boy and the painter were seated on the fountain's edge, watching the last ripples of night settle into quiet. The town seemed to breathe gently, as if exhaling after a long, magical dream. Lanterns dimmed slightly, and the colors in the air faded, leaving faint glimmers that would linger, visible only to those who remembered to look carefully. The painter set down her brush. "Every night is a story," she said softly. "Every painting, every stroke carries the memory of what was dreamed. But it is not the work itself that matters. It is the care we give, the attention we pay, the quiet wonder we choose to notice." The boy nodded, feeling a gentle warmth spread through him. He looked at the town one last time, noticing details he had overlooked before. A cat sleeping atop a warm roof, a window reflecting the colors of the sky like a living canvas, a leaf floating slowly across the fountain. Even the smallest things felt imbued with magic now, alive with stories he could almost hear if he listened closely enough. "You see," the painter whispered, "we cannot keep the night forever, but we can carry its lessons, its colors, its quiet magic with us." She smiled faintly, and for a moment, the boy felt as if he could see the faint threads of dreams connecting every corner of the town, stretching outward toward the world beyond. He realized then that the painter's magic was not in creating fantastical things, but in teaching him to see what was always there. The beauty in quiet moments, the wonder in small gestures, the life in stories that never demanded attention, yet thrived when noticed. The boy stood, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. "Will you paint tomorrow too?" he asked quietly, almost afraid to break the delicate calm. "Every night," she replied, "and every night will be different. And perhaps someday you will paint with me, or even on your own." She leaned back, resting her hands on the cool stone of the fountain. "Magic is not just mine. It belongs to those who notice it, to those who care enough to hold it gently." The boy lingered a moment longer, taking in the soft glow of the morning, the subtle shimmer of color still clinging faintly to the edges of the town. Then slowly, he turned and walked away, carrying with him the quiet knowledge that the world was alive with hidden stories, waiting to be found, waiting to be nurtured, waiting to be shared. And the painter remained by the fountain, a faint smile on her face, as the town stretched and yawned, the colors of night slowly folding into day, the magic lingering quietly, waiting for the next dreamer to notice. As the sun rose, the town continued its gentle rhythm, carrying the echoes of dreams and painted stories that would live forever in the quiet spaces of those who remembered to look, to feel, and to notice. And somewhere, the boy's heart held a small, bright thread of color, a gift from the painter and the night, ready to inspire a lifetime of quiet wonder. The night had ended, but the magic, the slow, gentle, patient magic, would endure.